So, since we're going to be pulled primarily from Galatians, what is the background to the letter of Galatians? Now, I've got a couple of different sources here that I'm kind of pulling from. A couple of different really good books. One of them being The Letter Writer by Tim Hegg. We got Pamela Eisenbaum's Paul Was Not a Christian. This particular book I got in hand right now is D. Thomas Lancaster's. It's kind of like a commentary. It's not really a commentary, though, on Galatians. It's more like sermons, a collection of sermons. Excuse me. So what's going on in the background here? And I guess I'll lead us in. Christianity. What's the best way to put this? You don't really have to kind of convert, right, into Christianity per se, as in there's no ritual for this to happen. There is within Catholicism a little bit, but even then you can kind of just start showing up, right? And you're expected a baptism, but there's not this rigorous conversion process that is something that exists within Judaism. So something that we have to get on the table here is that Christianity is not yet an option. There's not this we can just kind of integrate into a Christian faith and then think about baptism later on, and the conversion process is just kind of this thing that just kind of happens. What is it? So Brad, what are our options in the early days of Christianity?
Ooh.
We have three options essentially. What are your options in this background?
Well, in the early days of Christianity, what are you referring to there?
Not the early days. All right, so the letter to Galatians is one of the earliest letters written by Paul. It's probably the first one, or in the earliest.
Right.
So in his day, and again at this point in history, Christianity does not exist as a separate thing yet. It doesn't really become a separate thing until even going into the 2nd century. So your options are basically two options, and within one of those two options you have kind of three subcategories, but your two options are
either convert to Judaism
or don't.
or don't.
Yeah.
For in this age, if you wanted to find yourself attached to the family of God's people, right? If you wanted to find yourself in covenant with God, then you would have to convert to Judaism, right? Because that was the religion of God's people. That was the way of God's people, right? That was the covenant. And so you had to join yourself to that covenant. You had to become a member who was part of that covenant. If you chose not to, you could be what was called a devout Gentile, right? And this was somebody like we see in the case of Cornelius in Acts chapter 10, who, likely attended the synagogue. They observed the Torah as much as they were able, given their station. As we see in the case of Cornelius, he even engaged in the daily prayers, was constantly giving charity to the local synagogue and the local Jewish community. And in the case of Cornelius in particular, it's likely the only reason he hadn't converted is because of his status as a military officer. Mm-hmm. There's no reason for us to speculate anything other than that. He clearly wanted to be a part of the Jewish community, and so he did as much as he could in that endeavor. And this is prior to his knowledge of Yeshua at all, right? This was before his knowledge of Jesus and everything that Christianity eventually became built on. So clearly what he wanted was to be a part of the people of God. And the only thing that would have been holding him back would have been his military service. So, those were really, those are your three options, I guess. You could be a pagan, you could be a devout Gentile, or you could convert to Judaism.
Yeah. So and that's the important bit here we want to stress, is that Christianity as a separate thing apart from Judaism doesn't exist yet. So this is not a letter to Christians as we understand the term. The word Christian is a loaded term today. That's not really what's happening here. There are a number of believers in the synagogue, the congregation, the ecclesia of in the Galatian area, and there is a bit of tension, right? So the problem that we're going to run into, and this is going to be a big point for when we get to our incentives, but everyone's attending the synagogue, everyone's praying at the same time together, they're in communion with one another, they're constantly hanging out with each other, and these are your options, right? There's either this or you go back to being the pagan lifestyle. This is very much a Jewish faith. This is the idea of a Messiah is a Jewish concept. And the only people currently who are able to teach this concept and sort of live in this lifestyle is within the synagogues, the congregations at the synagogues. So this basically they're practicing Judaism. They believe in a Jewish faith, and they believe in a very, very Jewish concept. The issue is, and I think we covered this in our introduction, is that they're not, there's all these, you know, Gentiles who believe and have come to the faith and have started practicing and showing up to synagogue and everything, but they're not Jews, and that's going to create a little bit of political struggle here. Particularly in Galatians, they're referred to as like the influencers. We actually have no reason to believe that these influencers are an outside force. They seem to be an inside, like a sort of interior problem in the community to Galatians particularly. That is to say, these are members of the community who are kind of peer pressuring Gentiles into what is going to be the issue of conversion.